Welcome back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we talk about horror video games that need to be adapted into film. And with that, let's get to the list. Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a 2010 survival horror video game, developed and published by Frictional Games on PC and console. So this is one of those games that really changed what horror video games could be. And it still feels like it's just sitting there waiting to be turned into a truly miserable, soul-crushing horror movie. This game showed an entire generation that fear isn't created by weapons, but by taking them away. You play as Daniel, who wakes up alone in Brennenburg Castle with no memory of who he is or why he's there. And that amnesia isn't just a gimmick, it's the core of the story. And as you explore the castle, you slowly uncover memories that reveal not just what happened to you, but what kind of person you were that you chose to forget.
What have I done? This is crazy. Don't forget. Don't forget. I must stop him. Focus.
Visually, Amnesia is all about darkness, with candlelight and decay, stone corridors flooded in shadow, dripping water, and distant echoes that may or may not be real. And a movie adaptation should live in that same space. Barely lit rooms with long stretches of silence, and an overwhelming sense that something is watching you just out of frame. What really makes Amnesia perfect for a film adaptation is how little it shows you. The monsters are terrifying because you're not meant to look at them, and a movie should respect that. Keep the creatures obscured, half seen, distorted by darkness and movement, so you're letting the audience's imagination do the heavy lifting. At its core, this story is about guilt and self-punishment. Daniel isn't running from a monster, he is the monster, and that reveal would hit incredibly hard in a movie, especially if it does what the game does so well, and that's lean into the psychological horror and not the spectacle. But the reveal of the entire story is so bleak, dark, and twisted. And if a company like A24 were to come along and make this, it has the potential to be one of the most horrifying horror movies ever made. It's slow, twisted, and emotionally cruel. Perfect for a horror movie. Madison is a 2022 first-person horror video game, developed and published by Bloodiest Games on PC and console. This is pure nightmare fuel. You play as Luca, a young man haunted by a Polaroid camera that ties him to a series of ritualistic murders. And as he investigates, reality and nightmare blur, pulling him deeper into a cycle of terror that he can't escape from. The camera mechanic is brilliant because it forces you to interact with the horror instead of avoiding it. It puts you right smack dab in it. And a movie version could lean heavily on photography and repeated imagery, letting those visuals do the work when it comes to memory and trauma. And stylistically, it should feel oppressive and disorienting, bending reality just enough that you're never quite sure what's real. It should be dark and dingy, feeling raw and filthy, like you need to take a shower after watching it. The kind of horror movie where nothing feels stable, making you feel like you're in a full-blown nightmare.
Stay away!
Still Wakes the Deep is a 2024 psychological horror video game, developed by The Chinese Room and published by Secret Mode on PC and console. This is one of the most cinematic horror games in recent memory. It just feels perfect to make into a film. It's set on an oil rig in the North Sea during the 1970s and builds industrial horror with cosmic dread in a suffocating way. You play as a worker trapped on the rig after an ancient unknowable entity is unleashed from beneath the ocean. The setting alone here is horrifying, with tight metal corridors, roaring machinery, storms battering the structure, and nothing but black water in every direction, leaving you with this overwhelming feeling of vulnerability and helplessness. So visually, this would be incredible on screen. Rusted steel, emergency lighting, steam-filling hallways, and this constant feeling that the rig itself is dying. But I think a movie adaptation of this really needs to rely on practical effects and sound design. Stuff like metal groaning, alarms blaring, voices echoing through empty spaces, just stuff like that that just adds to the overall feel. But what makes the story here hit so hard is the human element. These are just working class people, unequipped to deal with cosmic horror. They're scared, confused, and just trying to survive and get home to their families. But the entity itself should remain mostly unseen here, existing more as a presence and not a creature. So you're showing the effects from it more than the creature itself. But this should be a bleak, full-grown ass horror movie, not some kind of fun teen slasher. Just brutal, cold, thought-provoking kind of horror, with no easy answers and no clean victory. It should feel overwhelming and suffocating. Just disturbing cosmic horror with the terror of brushing up against something ancient and uncaring. The kind of horror that just digs deep and doesn't let go. Outlast is a 2013 first-person survival horror video game, developed and published by Red Barrel Studio on PC and console. This is one of the most obvious horror video games out there to be adapted to film. And to be honest, it's kind of shocking that it hasn't until now. Reportedly, Lionsgate is developing something, but there's nothing concrete yet at the time of recording this. But this game is basically found footage horror in playable form. So you play as a journalist who breaks into an asylum after receiving a tip about illegal experiments, armed only with a camcorder. But you quickly discover something is horribly wrong. The asylum is filthy, violent, and completely unhinged. The look and feel of it is awesome. There's flickering lights, blood-smeared walls, and inmates who are terrifying not because they're monsters, but because they were made that way. The imagery is incredible and just so fucking twisted. But a movie adaptation, I think, should fully embrace that found footage aesthetic, or at the very least, heavily incorporate it with like night vision sequences, distorted audio, just lo-fi visual kind of vibe. And there should be scenes where the camera just keeps filming a little too long, so to speak, so you feel like you're seeing stuff you shouldn't. But this game works because it never lets you feel safe. So a film version should feel exhausting, relentless, and mean in the best way. Because this isn't safe kind of horror. This is a gory, twisted, fucked up kind of horror. But if it's done right, this could be one of the best video game horror movies ever made. So keep your fingers crossed that we get to see it at some point. Mouthwashing is a 2024 adventure horror video game, developed by Wrong Organ and published by Critical Reflex on PC. This is such a uncomfortable, weird video game in a way that just makes you squirm and uncomfortable from the jump. It's the stuff that just sticks with you long after it's over. It's psychological horror stripped down to its most raw element. It's set aboard a damaged spaceship drifting through space. The game follows a small crew dealing with the aftermath of a catastrophic event. So there are no monsters chasing you down hallways here. Instead, the horror comes from guilt, denial, and the way people fracture under pressure. Visually, it's sterile and oppressive. Cold metal interiors, harsh lighting, and framing that constantly makes you feel boxed in, claustrophobic. But the graphics are weird and stylish in an intentional way. It's a big part of what adds to it, just everything feeling off and strange. But it's also one of the things that would make this the most challenging to adapt into a movie, is how do you deal with the visuals? Like, what do you do visually for a live action adaptation? But a movie adaptation should lean heavily into the close-ups, long silences, fragmented storytelling, and slowly revealing the truth. But I think this would work best as a smaller indie kind of horror movie, a mid to low budget kind of movie with a small cast that really focuses on the performance instead of big special effects and things like that. I think it would be a really great fit for a company like Neon. But this should be the kind of movie that feels personal, close up and in your face, but quiet, cruel, and deeply human. Visage is a 2020 psychological horror video game, developed and published by Sad Square Studio on PC and console. This is one of the scariest haunted house experiences ever made, and it feels tailor-made to be a slow, intense, hold your breath kind of horror movie. This traps you inside a suburban house where tragedy has soaked every wall. It just is dripping in it. But you focus on different chapters, each focused on a disturbing personal story involving death, abuse, and loss. So I think it would be perfect for an anthology kind of horror movie, with multiple storylines that take place over many years in this house. But the house itself changes subtly. Hallways stretch, doors vanish, rooms rearrange themselves, just little differences when you're not looking. So it makes you feel lost and disoriented. Visually, this thrives on stillness, locked off shots with minimal camera movement, and a sound design that makes every creak feel intentional. No loud stingers, just lots of building dread. It should be a movie that feels intimate and cruel. The kind of horror that slowly creeps up on you and gets under your skin instead of jumping out at you. But this is such a brutal, bleak movie with lots of shocking moments and scenes that honestly will leave a movie audience's jaw on the floor.
Are you human?
Soma is a 2015 survival horror video game, developed and published by Frictional Games on PC and console. So this is existential horror at its very best. This game isn't just scary, it's devastating. You wake up in an underwater research facility after humanity has effectively ended. But the game immediately starts asking questions that few horror movies ever do. Like, what does it mean to be human? What makes you, you? If your consciousness is copied, are you still you? So it isn't just horror, it's very much sci-fi as well.
It really makes you think about what it means to be human.
I mean, if we are able to save even just a small piece of ourselves, why wouldn't we do that?
But visually, Soma is bleak and industrial, with flooded corridors, malfunctioning machinery, and artificial intelligence desperately clinging to the idea of humanity. But a film adaptation of this should be cold, quiet, and emotionally crushing, with textured and layered environments, high-tech, futuristic, yet broken, bleak visuals. But this wouldn't be a jump scare kind of movie. It would be a philosophical sci-fi kind of horror movie, the kind that leaves the audiences staring at the credits in silence.
Alan, wake up.
Alan Wake is a 2010 action-adventure horror video game, developed by Remedy Entertainment and published by Microsoft Game Studios on PC and console. So this already feels like a lost horror series. So it's wild that it still hasn't been adapted to film yet. There are some reports that it is in development to become a series and movie and whatnot, but who knows? At this point, there's nothing concrete. And so I figured I'd put it on this list anyway. But this game is thick with atmosphere and storytelling. You play as Alan Wake, a writer dealing with severe writer's block, who travels to a small town of Bright Falls with his wife. But when she disappears, reality itself starts bending. Pages from a novel Alan doesn't remember writing begin predicting events before they happen, and shadowy figures stalk the forest surrounding the town.
There's something special about this place. The lake, it does something to the works of art created here. It makes them come true.
The Pacific Northwest setting is doing a lot of work here, with dense forests, foggy roads, and lakes that just feel bottomless, and that eerie small town vibe where everyone feels like they know more than they're saying. And so a film adaptation needs to soak in that mood. Wide shots of empty roads, long nighttime sequences in the woods, and interiors that feel warm but unsafe at the same time. The flashlight mechanic is iconic here and would translate beautifully into film, with light as the protection, almost a weapon, and darkness as the threat. And the Taken, the possessed townspeople, they're not big flashy monsters. And that's a lot of what makes them so unsettling, because they still feel somewhat human. But Alan Wake is about obsession, creativity, and losing control of your own story. It's meta, it's moody, and it absolutely begs for a slow burn psychological horror movie that prioritizes atmosphere over action. Devotion is a 2019 first-person psychological horror video game, developed and published by Red Candle Games on PC. This is quiet, tragic horror. The story follows a family living in a Taiwanese apartment complex who are slowly unraveling as faith, guilt, and obsession take hold. And as reality begins to distort, the story reveals how devotion meant to save a loved one can instead become something deeply destructive.
你放心，此国观音非常灵验，你只要拿出诚心，所求之事一定可以达成。
This is such a sad, brutal, just emotional game that has so many layers and takes you in so many different directions. It's very mysterious as you are unpacking this tragic story little by little, and it's shocking and surprising, and I think it would make for an incredible art house kind of horror movie. A slow burn with minimal scares and an overwhelming sense of sadness and foreboding dread. And the supernatural elements should feel more symbolic than literal. But it's horror that's rooted in grief and denial, and that's what makes it hit so incredibly hard. So hopefully one day we'll see this translated into a film, but either way, if you haven't played this, you definitely should. Signalis is a 2022 survival horror video game, developed by Hamburg and published by Humble Games on PC and console. This feels like a lost sci-fi horror classic that's inspired by Silent Hill and classic anime. It tells a story of fragmented love, identity, and decay. It follows Elster, a replica android, who's searching for a woman after waking up in a decaying, authoritarian future. But reality begins to loop and fracture, revealing a tragic story about identity, memory, and a promise that refuses to be forgotten. Visually, this is stark and oppressive, with dark reds, deep shadows, and brutalist architecture. And a film adaptation should embrace that stylized look instead of trying to smooth it out. It should be heartbreaking and profound, futuristic and timeless, dreamy, moody, and haunting. This game is surreal, tragic, and deeply moving. But if done right, it would be the kind of movie that people continue to talk about for many years after. And yeah, this could be a challenging adaptation because of the visual style. But with the right writer and director, this has the potential to be a game changer. But either way, one day I hope we see it happen. But that's my list, but I would love to hear from you guys down in the comments. What are your favorite games that you think would make for a great movie adaptation? But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button. And remember guys, horror can be fun. And I'll see you all next time.